Chapter 431. Together. I watched with a frown as Cyra's human form morphed and changed for the first time, making way for her true form to show. My eyes widened slightly as I watched her change. She appeared to hold an uncommon grace and diminutive stature. She, unlike other dragons, stood apart in her elegance, her form a mere fraction of what I would deem normal, somewhat similar to that of Essie even. Yet within her slender frame laid a potency unmatched, and I could feel that through the deadly aura she was emitting. Two horns, elegant and curving, adorned her regal head, casting a faint, sinister aura in the light. As the sun's rays kissed her scales, a mesmerizing spectacle unfolded, each iridescent glimmer akin to the crackling of lightning upon her dark purple skin. At the end of her lithe tail rests a horizontal tip, fashioned in the likeness of an arrowhead, a subtle yet unmistakable testament to her lethal nature. Along her back, rows of spines curve backward like sinister sentinels, a silent warning to any who dare cross her path. Despite her stature, her eyes burned with a primal intensity, their hue a blend of blue and magenta, reminiscent of the fierce dance of lightning in a stormy sky. Though she stood proud, her imposing presence softened by her diminutive size, there was definitely an undeniable allure to her, a magnetic pull that drew all of our gaze as we beheld her, watching lightning gather around her and the sky above. My eyes turned downwards toward the direction where we had left the village. I could feel a buzz of activities, but I didn't have time to make sense of what exactly as Cyra suddenly spoke. "Looks like you are on your own, kids." "What do you mean? You're not coming?" I asked. "I have some old scores to settle. Leave and don't trust anyone." My frown deepened. "Where would we even go? We don't know where the world you mentioned is. The name's Aines. I'm sorry. I'll hold them back, so leave." Leaving those final words behind, the old dragoness turned into a blur followed by the sound of thunder as she shot downward, leaving the celestial mountain range behind. "Brother, we have to go," Sidis urged. "Damn it." I cursed and flapped my wings, shooting toward the sky. Sidis, Emmy, and Enos were flying by my side, while Essie was on my head and Brita on my back. The higher we flew, the easier it got to see the constant conflict. From above, my eyes darted as I easily saw the figures of both shades, dragons, and gods alike fighting all across the plain. Most seemed to steer away from the mortal lands and mortal cities, but some had inevitably caused damage. I could only pray my disciples and church were safe and prepared, as this war still did not seem to have an end in sight. "Enemy to the left." Emmy's voice echoed in our ears, and I instantly focused my attention on my flank, where a massive green dragon was approaching with a bloodthirsty aura. "I got it." Sidis spoke and disappeared. I did not know how he did it. I could only sense his darkness mana veil him, and he was gone. The green dragon did not seem to notice, or perhaps did not care as B continued his approach. Brita, who was on my back, frowned and summoned her golden spear. Her eyes shone for a moment before she hurled it at the newcomer. The green dragon snorted in disdain and used his wind magic to redivert the direction of the spear. Just as it seemed like it would miss, little Essie made her move, using her mastery over mana to wrest control from him. Her sudden interference causes the spear to continue unhindered. The green dragon's eyes widened in panic as he hastily tried to dodge, but the spear still managed to hit him in the shoulder, drawing blood. The dragon's eyes turned red as he roared in anger. I did not pay him any more attention as I felt Sidis materialized right above him. It was already too late for him. By the time he noticed anything was wrong, Sidis had already descended on him and used both of his claws to deliver a fatal strike to the back of his neck. He followed it with a dragon breath for extra measures. After that, Sidis's figure disappeared once more and quickly reappeared next to me. "It still leaves a bad taste in my mouth," he said with a frown. "I know, but they sealed their fate when they decided to attack us," I answered. After that, no one managed to reach us, and we quickly left the plane's atmosphere, and soon after found ourselves leaving the plane's protection barrier. "Stay close, it's too dangerous," I said. "We break through the battlefield, and you can teleport us further away once we gain some distance." Emmy spoke, and I nodded. "I'll clear the front," Enos declared and took the lead. The chaotic battlefield that I had left before was still the same as before. The only difference, however, was the fact that both sides were seemingly waiting for us. The second we appeared, they both rushed toward us. The loyalists that followed the king didn't seem to be intent on harming us per se, but I still did not like the looks in their eyes. "Move out of the way." Enos's voice reverberated in everyone's ears as his muscular figure bulged even further, boosted by his earth mana. The first unfortunate soul who did not heed his warning was a shade with the appearance of an obsidian insect. Enos simply lowered his head and aimed his horns straight at the oversized bug. A faint shield appeared before his horns, followed by a small explosion as the bug was quite literally pulverized. The one right behind was a goddess, who seemed to panic once she saw what had happened. She tried to dodge the raging hulk of muscle that was Enos, and would have probably even succeeded had he not specifically gone out of his way to aim for her. The aftermath was anything but pretty as we followed after him, his maniac laugh resounding in our ears. Emmy was keeping her right side clear while Sidis took care of our left. Brita had our backs, and little Essie provided support when needed. For now, it seemed like there was no need for me to step in as all of the big guys were holding each other back at the far edges of the battlefield. "I hope nothing happens," I mumbled to myself. Chapter 432. Newcomer. "That was fun," grinned Enos as he flew closer to us. I looked at his bloodied state with raised brows. His golden scales were dyed red by the blood of all the unfortunate souls who decided to step in his way. "Fun, you say?" He smiled and continued scanning the area around us as we flew, his eyes shining in hopes of finding another challenger. Luckily, however, it seemed like we were in the clear for now. The loyalists decided against approaching us once they saw the look on Enos's face in the aftermath of facing him head-on. The Shades and the others, on the other hand, tried to stop us a few more times before they gave up as well. It wasn't much of a surprise since most of the big guys were fighting at the far edges of the battlefield and had no time to turn their attention toward us, which worked quite well in our favor. "What was the name of that planet again?" Sidis asked with a frown as we flew further and further away from the brightly illuminated battlefield. "Anes," I replied. "How are we supposed to find that?" He sighed with a frown. "I'm not sure, but first things first, we have to leave this area. It's not safe anymore." "Teleport?" little Essie asked while tightly gripping my horns for support. "Yes," I smiled. "Come closer, all of you," I continued. Enos flew under me, while Sidis took to my left and Emmy to my right. Brita was on my back, and little Essie was happily settled on top of my head. With everyone accounted for, I summoned my cosmic mana. This time, the elements moved from all around us and encompassed everyone with me at the center before we were whisked away. Almost instantly, we were somewhere else. The teleportation process was smooth, and the group barely felt anything as we found ourselves in a different part of space. Before they could say anything, I teleported us once more. I would have liked to say that I had a destination in mind, or that I knew where I was going. Unfortunately, that was not the truth. I was simply following my gut feeling and letting the cosmic mana guide me. The elements were very much so alive. They understood my emotions better than anyone, and so I leaned on that feeling and continued to teleport. Once, twice, 3 times. It didn't take long before I lost count of how many teleportations we made, and I couldn't even fathom how large of a distance we had crossed. Still, I persistently followed the guidance of the cosmic mana, one teleportation at a time. Sure enough, after a while, the familiar dark scenery of space changed as a bright star appeared before us. I paused and glanced at the massive blue planet before it. It looked to be inhabited. 2 moons lazily orbited around it. "Is that it?" Enos asked in confusion. "I don't think so." I hesitated before answering. "Can we check it out?" Essie excitedly asked. I glanced at Sidis and Emmy, who shrugged before nodding. "Might as well." As we approached the planet, we all kept our guard up, expecting the worst. Still, there was no barrier protecting the world and no sign of divinity. Were there no gods in this world? As we broke through the surface, we landed in a massive open grass meadow, though its color was a strange scarlet one. Mana was present in this world, though not as abundant as the main plane. Brita jumped from my back and landed on the grass. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, seemingly enjoying the light breeze. Essie quickly followed after her, and stretched her wings, flying in circles above us. Her light giggles echoed across the field. "Is this okay?" Sidis asked lightly as he approached me. "What is this?" he said, motioning to everyone before continuing. "Aren't we supposed to be running?" He asked. "I didn't take you for one that runs away," I teased. "Don't poke fun at me, brother. Even I know that we hold no chance should everyone turn against us." "True, but we don't have a choice now. We don't even have a plan. And we don't know where this Aines world is at," I replied. Deep down, I still held a slight hope that the cosmic mana would lead me to the right way, but I couldn't be so sure. "Is there any chance that this place is Aines?" he asked, as he raised his head to stare at Essie, who was enjoying herself. Looking around, I lightly frowned. "Somehow, I doubt it. Cyra said that world had gods and dragons. I can't sense a single strand of divinity here." "There are some mortals," he replied. I nodded. "And there is a faint aura of dragons. Are we staying here?" Enos asked with a yawn as he approached. "I don't mind," Brita added. Right before I could answer, I turned my gaze to the south where a presence was fast approaching. "A dragon? Someone is coming," Emmy added solemnly. Right after that, the figure of the newcomer was made clear. It was a dragoness. Chilling winds whipped through the land as she approached, with eyes as piercing as a frozen peak. Her gaze a beacon of frost-kissed intensity as she scanned us. Frosted white horns crowned her head, gleaming like polished diamonds under the light of the sun, a stark contrast to the azure hue of her scales. Along her back, curved spines jut out like jagged peaks, each one adorned with a delicate fin that extends from the back of her head to the tip of her tail, lending her an ethereal beauty. Her scales, a brilliant shade of azure, shimmered with an otherworldly glow as she approached, their ends frosted in a pristine white that sparkled like freshly fallen snow. Judging from her aura, she was strong, but we were stronger, of that at least, I was sure. Still, although she didn't seem to hold any ill intentions, I was still prepared for whatever might happen. The dragoness landed gracefully before us, and the wind almost immediately turned cold in her presence. "Water dragoness with a strong ice element," I noted. She was of average height, a bit shorter than me, but not by much. Before we could say anything, her frosty visage fell as she gave a wide, almost innocent smile. "Oh, thank the king. Finally, someone came." Her voice was cheerful as she smiled warmly at us, a massive contrast from the initial impression she gave. Hello?" Chapter 433, Lost. "Hi, I'm lost," she said. Her cheery voice was almost contagious. "Oh, so are we," Essie said as she landed in front of the newcomer with a smile. "You're lost as well?" she said, her eyes widening in shock. "Yes, we don't know where we are." "I'm Essie. What's your name?" "My name?" Confused, the dragoness continued. "I'm lost." Essie's expression turned awkward as she glanced at me with puzzlement clear in her eyes. "Your name is Lost?" I asked again for confirmation. "Yes," the ice dragoness confirmed. "Wow, that's a cool name," Essie chimed in. "Thank you. I'm Ether. These are my siblings, Essie, Sidis, Emmy, and Enos." I paused and motioned to Brita before continuing. "The goddess over there is my friend Brita." Lost nodded slightly at everyone, before asking, "What are you guys doing here?" "Well," I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "We were trying to find our way to a planet called Aines. When we lost our way, Emmy suddenly spoke up, and I nodded in confirmation." "Oh." Lost's eyes lit up before she replied, "Newcomers." "Newcomers? Does that mean that here is—" Sidis began to speak, but was stopped by Lost. "No, not here. But I'm originally from Aines." "Is that so?" I replied. "Is this also the doing of the cosmic mana?" I inwardly wondered. "Then this place is?" I asked, waiting for her to continue. The ice dragoness's expression turned hard, and she seemed to hesitate for a second before speaking. "Aines is not that far away from here. The only problem is the void." "What's that?" "How about you all come with me first? Let's go to a more comfortable place." I turned to look at the others. Sidis shrugged, and Emmy simply nodded. Enos was strangely fascinated by the scarlet flowers, and little Essie was already settled on top of my head. I glanced at Brita and the goddess gave a silent nod. Then please lead the way. Great, she replied and shot to the sky, with us quickly following in tow. Are you sure you know where we are going? I couldn't help but ask, as my eyes wandered to the scarlet field below. I was sure that this was our third time flying over the same field. I even left a strand of cosmic mana, just in case, and there it was. The ice dragoness seemed nervous as she kept mumbling to herself. It can't be. It was right here, no? Where are we going? And maybe I can ask the wind for help? Little Essie asked hesitantly. Lost turned to her and replied with an embarrassed face, in my lair. It's at the peak of a massive mountain, with pink trees and violet flowers. Okay. Little Essie then closed her eyes, and I could feel the wind moving gently around her before it grew in intensity and expanded outwards. Soon enough, she opened her eyes and spoke. I think I found it. Lead the way. I smiled. Essie nodded with a proud expression and jumped off my head. Lost's face was ashamed as she followed after her. Lost. Is she just terrible with directions? I wondered. It didn't take long before I had my confirmation. The mountain she was speaking of wasn't even that far. Yet somehow, the ice dragoness managed to fly us in circles for hours. Is this really okay? Yes, it's here, she said excitedly as we landed on the side of the mountain. The landscape unfolded in breathtaking beauty, where harmonious hues intertwined, crafting a tranquil tableau of the mountain. A gentle brook meandered its way down the slope to our left, while on our right, an expansive field stretched forth, its grass ablaze in a scarlet hue. Upon our descent, the ice dragoness swiftly made her way to her so-called lair, nestled atop the mountain's pinnacle. I prepared to follow her, yet my attention was arrested by the uncharacteristic silence of Enos. What's wrong? I approached him and asked. The earth mana, he said, digging his claws into the earth before continuing. It's strange. Strange? I asked again while scanning our surroundings. I was no longer connected to the elements the way I was before, so I couldn't feel anything wrong per se. The wind is strange as well, Essie, who was walking next to me, added as well. I turned my gaze to Sidis and Emmy, who both shook their heads. I can't feel anything wrong, Sidis replied. Me neither, Emmy added. Brita, my divinity, I'm not sure. Something isn't right, she said. All right, everyone stay close, and keep your guard up. We don't want any sudden surprises, I said and began walking towards the cave. The moment I stepped inside, a frigid gust of icy wind assaulted my face, prompting a slight furrow of my brow. The cavern exuded an icy chill, a fitting domain for the ice dragoness. It was expansive and vast, and it rivaled our own cave back home, save for its lack of additional entrances beyond the main one. Walls adorned with shimmering blue crystals emitted a soft azure glow, casting ethereal light throughout the cavern. Towering sculptures depicting dragons, monsters, and mortals adorned the space. Some were intricately crafted, while others bore the marks of amateurism. Amidst the array, the ice dragoness busied herself, maneuvering a sizable sculpture from the center to the rear of the cave. Her latest creation, a self-portrait, appeared to evoke a sense of embarrassment as she turned it to face the wall before acknowledging our presence. Sorry for the mess. I wasn't expecting guests, she said. Not at all. Excuse us for intruding, I said. Please, make yourself at home, she said and motioned for us to come inside, her eyes nervously glancing at her latest statue. You made all of this? Emmy asked as she approached a beautiful statue depicting a short human with a long beard. Yes I did. It's a hobby, you can say, the dragons replied nervously. It's pretty, Emmy answered. A wide smile bloomed on Lost's face upon hearing the compliment. Thank you. I can make one for you as well if you want, she said, suddenly enthusiastic. I would love that, Emmy replied with a smile. Me too. I also want one. Essie jumped in. Of course. Lost, gaining more confidence, nodded with a grin. So do you live here? I asked while walking around the cave, my eyes admiring the various ice sculptures. Lost hesitated before answering, It's complicated. I crash-landed here, and I can't leave. Her words made me stop, and I subconsciously glanced at Brita. Our eyes met for a brief moment before I turned to Lost and asked, I'm going to need you to elaborate on that. Chapter 434. The Pole. We gathered at the cavern's heart, where Lost had cleared a spacious space for our assembly. My gaze roamed the cavern, entranced by the faintly glowing crystals, before ultimately fixing upon our peculiar host. Sidis, Emmy, and Brita bore solemn countenances, their expressions weighted with anticipation for her words. In contrast, Enos and Essie displayed disinterest, engrossed in discourse regarding the abnormalities of mana. So, you said you come from Anes? I asked. Lost inclined her head in affirmation before responding, Yes, that is my birthplace, she remarked, her mouth curling into a gentle smile. It was evident that the planet held cherished memories within her heart. And here is? I asked while glancing at the cavern. Lost shook her head before speaking. This plane doesn't have a name. She paused for a second before continuing. Since it's situated at the edge, near the void, no one comes here. You keep saying the void. What is that exactly? Emmy jumped in and asked with a slight frown. Lost's brows raised in surprise as she turned to face her. You don't know? The void? She asked in disbelief. Are we supposed to? Sidis asked with a frown. No. I'm sorry. I suppose you don't. I forgot you guys are not from here. She shook her head and replied. Sidis turned to look at me with a frown, and I gave him a slight nod. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure we quite understand where here is supposed to be, I added. Oh, that's easy. You're at the edge of the universe, she said with a strangely chirpy voice. Her words prompted a furrow of my brow, and it seemed the others shared my sentiment. Even Enos and Essie ceased their discussion, their attention drawn to the dragoness as they gazed at her intently. Lost seemed surprised by our reaction and spoke. What's wrong? Are you guys Central Worlders? Central Worlders? I asked again in confusion. No, we are from the main plane, Brita replied. Oh, really? That's amazing. I've never met anyone from the main world. Lost suddenly stood up in excitement, her eyes brimming with newfound curiosity. I turned toward Brita and motioned for her to explain. Central Worlders are those born in planets in the middle of the universe. That's where most of the battlefields against the Shades are. The main plane, however, is situated at the edge, she explained. The edge? Emmy mumbled. So we didn't teleport too far? Essie asked with a tilted head. The main plane is close by? She continued. No? The main plane is on the other side of the universe, Lost said calmly. For an instant, a hush fell over the cavern, the gravity of the revelation sinking in. Lost, however, appeared oblivious to the tension, her expression one of puzzlement as she regarded us with confusion. After what felt like a few minutes, I shook my head and asked, So does that mean we are back in Shade territory? Oh no, they don't come here, she quickly replied. How come? Sidis couldn't help but ask, Since you said no one stays here, is this world still part of Dragon territory? Dragon territory? What do you mean? Puzzled, Lost asked with her brows raised. Sidis's frown deepened as he spoke. Who rules this world? Whose territory does it belong to? No one, of course. It's right by the void. No one dares to come here. So it's neither Shade nor Dragon territory, I said, to which she nodded. This entire area, with Anas included, is not part of any territory. I think my mother called it the Free Plains. Huh, is that so? Yes, the battlefields, I hear, are so far away. I've never been to one before. I hear they can be quite chaotic. That they are, I replied absent-mindedly, my thoughts consumed by the information at hand as I tried to piece together a mental map of the universe. To the far left lay the main plane, with the void looming beyond. The central realms served as the primary battlegrounds, and presently we found ourselves at the furthest right, with the void at our backs. So the void is the end? Essie asked while scratching her head. Yes. Mother says that's where the world meets its end. There lies naught but emptiness, and any who venture into it are doomed to wander endlessly, unable to escape. Upon hearing that, I couldn't shake the memory of the outlandish theory we had heard earlier. Could it possibly hold some truth? My breath quickened, my heart skipping a beat at the thought. If it were true, Did that mean we were all akin to birds trapped in a cage? It appeared I wasn't the sole one grappling with these thoughts, as Sidis, Emmy, and Brita fell into deep contemplation, their auras displaying a hint of instability. Is that why the mana is strange in this place? Enos, who was quiet this entire time, suddenly spoke with a frown. Strange? Lost seemed confused for a second before realizing what Enos was talking about. Yes. Mother says it's the influence of the void. The closer one is to it, the more erratic the mana becomes. I'm used to it, so I can't really tell the difference, she said with an embarrassed expression. Enos gave a nod in reply. And why can't you leave exactly? I asked. The planet is dangerously close to the void, Lost explained gravely. The moment I depart the atmosphere, I risk being entrapped by its pull. How did you even get here? Sidis asked with a frown. Upon hearing this, Lost scratched her head in embarrassment before responding, I was curious. Mother always cautioned me against venturing too near, but life in Inez grew boring, and Mother seldom allowed me interactions with mortals. She paused briefly before continuing, so I departed. My intention wasn't to arrive here. I was merely drawn by curiosity about the void. But I underestimated its force and found myself crash-landing in this planet. It was either that or be drawn into the void, forever lost. That's strange. We didn't feel any such pull when we came. And certainly didn't see this void that you were talking about, I replied with a frown. Of course, you can't see the void, silly, Lost chuckled. It's shrouded in darkness. What would there be to see? She paused, then added, but no pull? How is that possible? I barely managed to prevent myself from colliding with the two moons. That's weird. I frowned. Chapter 435. The conversation persisted for a while longer, with Lost providing us with a brief overview of her homeworld, Inez. Eventually, it concluded with us elaborating on the primary plane, detailing the ongoing war efforts and recounting the sudden onslaught of the Shade's all-out invasion. I never thought the central worlds and the main plane to be so exciting, she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I suppose that's one way of looking at it, I replied with a light nod. So, is it safe to assume that besides the void pull, you have nothing else on this planet that's stopping you from leaving? I asked. Lost nodded hesitantly. It took her a few seconds before she managed to speak. Are you sure you didn't feel the pull? She asked again, the uneasiness clear in her voice. Brother Ether does not lie. There was no such thing. Enos, who was silent this entire time, spoke up. I don't mean to be disrespectful. It's just that. Lost hesitated, and I quickly jumped in. It's okay. I understand. Thank you. She replied with a light sigh. How long have you been stranded in here for? Emmy asked, her claws gently tapping on the beautiful sculpture of a big dragoness as she walked around the cave. A little over a year, I think. Lost replied. Did you find anything fun in this world? Essie excitedly asked. The dragoness scratched her head in deep thought before speaking hesitantly. There are some mortals, but they try to attack me every time they see me, so I just spend most of my time here, she said, motioning to the various sculptures. It's not bad, really. I think I am becoming better. She paused for a couple of seconds before continuing. It's just, I miss home, she added with a bitter smile. Seeing Lost with her head lowered, Essie fluttered her wings and flew over to her, gently patting her head. It's all right. Brother Ether is the cosmic pillar. He'll guide you home. Her words brought a smile to my face and caused Lost's eyes to widen in shock. You mean cosmic as in pillar of existence? She said in disbelief. Of course. Essie replied proudly with a puffed chest. Sister Emmy and Brother Sidis are the pillars of light and darkness, she added smugly. Lost's eyes lost focus for a second, and it almost seemed like she was going to faint. How? What do you mean? Essie asked with a tilted head. Mother said that pillars almost never survive their naming ceremony, and that's why there are no adult pillar dragons. Her words made me fall into deep thought. Now that I think about it, we were really lucky, I inwardly noted. As the eldest and strongest, I alone held the right to attend the naming ceremony. Given my survival, Emmy and Sidis were spared the ordeal. Though formidable for their age at the time, I doubted they would have endured the ascent of the stairs. The memory of the young brown dragon's demise lingered vividly in my thoughts. Is it merely coincidence? I pondered. It seemed too improbable to dismiss as mere chance. While I hadn't dwelled on it much before, the realization struck me. Wasn't it peculiar that 3 out of 4 pillars hailed from our family? Brother Ether is the strongest. He was even personally named by the king. Essie added. Lost's brain seemed to have short-circuited as she was glancing at us with a blank stare. Her mouth opened and closed a few times. Maybe that's why you don't feel the pull? She said after a while. Perhaps, I replied, brushing aside the myriad thoughts that had occupied my mind moments before. Now was not the time for such reflection. Nonetheless, I silently resolved to revisit these thoughts later. It was crucial. Why speculate when we can simply go and find out the truth firsthand? Enos interjected, rising to his feet and stretching his neck. A chuckle escaped my lips. It was so typical of him. No plan, but somehow the best plan. Still, there was some truth in his words. There was no use in speculating. The fastest way to figure this out was by testing it ourselves. I can't believe I'm saying this, but he has a point, Sidis agreed. Well, in that case, no better time than the present, I said and stood up. Wait. Pillar of existence or not, it's the void we are talking about. It's too dangerous. Lost hastily stopped us. Enos laughed and answered with a smirk. Don't worry, you don't need to be afraid. I'll protect you, he shamelessly proclaimed. Embarrassed, Lost's mouth opened in surprise before she hurriedly averted her gaze and began mumbling to herself. Oh? So that's what a blushing dragoness looks like? Enos, oblivious to the implications of his words, moved toward her and used his tail to drag her along with him outside the cave. Don't worry, I'm here. Void or not, I can still send you back to the planet, if worst comes to be. Lost, rendered speechless, trailed after him with her head bowed. Briefly, she cast us a glance, her expression tinged with embarrassment, before swiftly averting her gaze. I didn't think Enos had it in him, Emmy said as she walked next to me. Brita, who was by her side, replied before I can. I don't think he understands what he's doing, she said, slightly shaking her head. A small laugh escaped my mouth. I think it's cute. Emmy shook her head. I feel bad for her already. Like you're any better, Sidis spoke, defending Enos. Huh? What is that supposed to mean? Emmy frowned. You heard me, said Sidis before he left. Emmy turned toward me and Brita and asked, Do you see what I'm dealing with? I lightly patted her head with my tail before following after the rest. Emmy followed behind with a frown. Outside of the cave, Enos appeared ready to take off and still had his tail wrapped around the poor dragoness. Was he planning to drag her along like that? Thankfully, Sidis was there to save the day. He moved toward him and lightly hit his head, causing him to let go of Lost. Wait, we'll let Brother Ether test it out first, he said. Why? There's a possibility that the only reason we didn't feel the pull is because of him and his cosmic element, Sidis explained. So we'll go after him? Enos asked, to which Sidis nodded before answering, We'll all go, but we have to be smart about this. We can't risk anyone getting lost in this void, especially when we couldn't even see it. Chapter 436, Elements. As our final exchange of glances unfolded, I observed the varying expressions etched upon each one's face. Sidis, ever the stoic, bore a solemn countenance, his eyes reflecting a depth of contemplation. Enos, in stark contrast, wore a grin so broad it seemed to stretch from ear to ear, his confidence palpable as he exuded an air of excitement rather than concern. Brita's nod carried a weight of caution, her gaze conveying a silent warning amidst the anticipation of our impending endeavor. Be careful, she urged, her voice laced with a subtle hint of apprehension. There's a chance we were just incredibly lucky, she added. Standing beside Brita, Emmy nodded in agreement, her features mirroring a blend of determination and caution. The moment you sense anything awry, teleport without hesitation, she advised, her voice carrying a note of urgency. Don't worry, I'm not going to risk it. I'll be fast, I replied without hesitation. Good luck? Lost, who was standing a foot behind Enos, mustered her courage and spoke up. Don't worry. How many times do I have to remind you? Little Essie chimed in confidently, taking it upon herself to respond on my behalf. Brother Ether is the strongest, she declared with unwavering assurance. While I wouldn't openly admit it to their faces, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they held me in such high regard. A faint smile graced my face as I ascended into the sky. With each flap of my wings, I propelled myself higher, gaining altitude before initiating teleportation. I executed the process in brief bursts, traversing small distances with each teleportation. There was no point in rushing. As I neared the planet's atmosphere, my form began to flicker in and out of existence until finally, I emerged beyond its bounds. For a fleeting moment, I hung suspended in the boundless expanse of space, my wings outstretched as if embracing the cosmos. It was a sensation akin to returning home. With eyes closed, I savored the familiar embrace for a few precious seconds before reopening it to the endless expanse before me. Behind me lay the planet, its serene beauty accentuated by the lazy orbit of its 2 moons. Yet, ahead stretched an expanse of darkness, an abyss devoid of any familiar illumination. Directing my focus to the space before me, it vaguely evoked memories of shared territory. Here, amidst the void, no familiar starlight pierced the darkness, leaving only a pure abyssal expanse. What struck me as strange, however, was the absence of any sense of foreboding. Instead, it simply felt empty. So that's the void, I inwardly noted. There was no discernible pull, or at least none that I could perceive. Yet, to be doubly certain, I resumed teleporting in brief increments, traversing small distances as I neared the expanse of vast void. Its boundaries were elusive, difficult to ascertain amidst the darkness. However, even as I distanced myself further from the planet, the absence of any sort of pull persisted. Interesting, is it just me? Or would the others not feel it as well? I felt the temptation to continue onward, yet as I ventured farther from the planet, a growing sense of apprehension gnawed at my resolve. With each passing moment, hesitation tightened its grip until finally, I shook my head and compelled myself to turn back. Before departing completely, however, I cast one last glance toward the endless expanse of the void. Maybe some other time. The journey back proved uneventful. I refrained from teleportation, opting instead to rely solely on my wings. The void exerted no influence over me, allowing for a smooth return flight. As I re-entered the planet's atmosphere, I initiated teleportation directly to rejoin the others. Appearing right above them proved to be a not-so-smart decision, as Brita and Sidis, already on the edge and positioned at the ready, nearly simultaneously unleashed their attacks in my direction. Fortunately, I swiftly dodged the incoming assaults before teleporting safely to the ground. Whoa, calm down, it's me. Ah. Brita lowered her spear, and Sidis dissipated his mana. I shifted my gaze towards Enos, who had conjured a massive boulder and was poised to launch it in my direction. As our eyes met, he awkwardly averted his gaze. What are you doing? I asked. Ahem. Well, they all had a shot, so? A disappointed sigh escaped my mouth as I shook my head before speaking. Drop it. Now's not the time. Clicking his tongue in frustration, Enos released the massive boulder, causing the ground to tremble upon impact. He grumbled to himself about the perceived unfairness of the situation, his discontent evident in his muttering. So, how did it go? Emmy inquired, drawing nearer. Essie, standing beside her, fixed me with eyes brimming with anticipation, her gaze alight with curiosity. I gave a light shake of my head before responding, no pull. I even tested it by flying back instead of relying on teleportation. Still nothing. How can that be possible? Lost muttered in disbelief, her voice tinged with astonishment. Essie, appearing satisfied with her reaction, lifted her head high with a smirk, gazing toward the sky with a sense of accomplishment. Who goes next? I asked. I'll go. Sidis stepped forward. Huh, why you? Emmy asked with a frown. I wasn't asking, Sidis retorted, his tone firm, before his shadow elongated from the ground, enveloping him before propelling skyward. That basta. Well, guess I'll go make sure he's safe. I quickly interrupted before teleporting behind him. His silhouette resembled that of a living shadow, with only his eye emitting a faint glow amidst the darkness. He cast a glance in my direction as I materialized beside him, uttering, "Stay back for the time being. Don't worry, I'll intervene only if the situation takes a turn for the worse," I assured him. With those words spoken, I came to a halt, observing as his figure gradually receded into the distance, moving farther and farther away from the planet. Squinting my eyes, I remained vigilant, poised to react swiftly at the slightest hint of trouble, yet still, no disturbances arose. Even Sidis hesitated, pausing in his departure to cast a lingering gaze in my direction. His eyes shifted between the expanse of void and me for a fleeting moment before he reluctantly began his return journey. I waited until he made the journey back himself before asking, "No pull?" "No, nothing," he replied. "In that case, I doubt Emmy would feel anything either," I said, to which he reluctantly agreed. "Might have something to do with our elements," he said, to which I nodded. "Well, best we make sure that's the case then." Chapter 437, Afraid. The next one to go was Emmy. By the time Sidis completed his return, her eyes emitted an intense glare directed at him. Unfazed, Sidis appeared indifferent, perhaps even relishing in provoking a reaction from her. Emmy must have recognized the futility of her anger, as after a brief moment, she made a concerted effort to regain her composure, forcibly calming herself before deliberately ignoring Sidis. Redirecting her attention towards me, she resumed our interaction. "The idiot didn't get pulled, I assume?" she asked. "No, he didn't feel anything," I answered. "A shame," she muttered under her breath, causing Sidis to turn and glare at her. "Well, then I'm next." Saying that, Emmy took off, and I was once again forced to follow behind with a sigh. The journey back through outer space proved monotonous, punctuated only by the sight of Emmy's scales glowing intensely, transforming her into a luminous meteor streaking across the dark expanse. Subconsciously, I clenched my teeth nervously, my gaze fixed intently on her as she neared the void, poised to spring into action at the slightest indication of trouble. Thankfully, it appeared there was no need for intervention on my part. Emmy proceeded with her flight unhindered, exhibiting no signs of being affected by any pull whatsoever. She effortlessly maneuvered through space without encountering any issues. After a brief span of time, she pivoted and returned towards me, shaking her head in disappointment. A sigh of relief escaped me as I accompanied Emmy back to the planet's surface. Upon landing, Sidis cast a brief glance in her direction before harumphing and pointedly ignoring her. "Who is next?" I asked, turning my attention to Essie, Enos, and Lost. The ice dragoness shrank back, nervously tugging at Enos's tail for comfort. I anticipated him to leap forward and volunteer, yet to my surprise, the blockhead remained remarkably composed as he addressed her reassuringly. "It's all right, we'll go last. Don't fret, I'm here with you. Pull or not, you will return home." Lost hesitated for a moment before nodding her head. Thank you," she stammered, to which Enos responded with a wide grin. At this point, I wasn't even certain if he was fully aware of his actions. Shaking my head in mild amusement, I turned to little Essie and offered a smile. "Looks like it's just you and me," I remarked. "Yes," Essie exclaimed eagerly. With that, she swiftly flew over and perched atop my head, sporting a satisfied smile. I gave a light shake of my head, the smile lingering on my lips as I prepared to take off. This time, I chose not to rely on teleportation, but rather to enjoy the journey by flying, relishing the sensation of the wind rushing past, and cherishing the time spent with Essie. "Brother?" Essie's voice broke the silence as we soared through the sky. What is it?" I inquired. Essie appeared to hesitate for a moment before finally speaking up. "I miss father." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I was at a loss for words. "I am sorry. I should be strong," Essie suddenly apologized. No, it's all right. That's completely normal," I reassured her. "Is it?" she questioned again, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Everyone seems so," okay with it. I paused for a moment, carefully considering my response before answering. Everyone is simply coping with the loss in their own way. It's perfectly natural to miss him and feel sad, I explained. Essie fell silent for a few moments before asking again, her voice barely above a whisper, "Do you miss him?" A long sigh escaped me. Ever since I entered my first cosmic battlefield, a lingering awareness of mortality accompanied me, a constant reminder that death loomed ever close. In that perilous arena, everyone was vulnerable and safety remained an elusive dream. Yet, despite this awareness, I never anticipated Father being the first to fall. I do miss him, I replied. Essie fell silent once more at my response. It wasn't until we were on the verge of crossing the planet's atmosphere into the boundless void of space that she finally whispered, "I don't want to die, brother. I'm scared." Huh? Essie, you're not dying. I'm right here with you, I reassured her, my voice gentle yet firm. Promise? She asked again, her tone tinged with uncertainty. I promise, I replied, the assurance in my voice unwavering. It was only then that I sensed Essie finally relax a bit. Once we had emerged from the planet's atmosphere, she silently hopped off my head and turned to face me. I'll be right here with you. If you sense anything wrong, I'll teleport you out of there, all right? I offered, my voice tinged with reassurance. Essie nodded in response. Okay, she affirmed softly. With that, I watched intently as Essie's little form soared towards the void. My focus remained entirely on her, my senses keen and cosmic mana poised, prepared to react swiftly to any unforeseen problems that may arise. At first, everything appeared to be proceeding smoothly. Essie continued her journey without interruption, unhindered by any apparent obstacles. However, it wasn't until she had distanced herself considerably from me that calamity struck abruptly. It seemed as though something had seized hold of her suddenly, yanking her towards the void with a velocity far beyond anything before. Essie began to thrash about frantically, desperately attempting to halt her descent, but her efforts proved futile. Almost instinctively, my body sprang into action. Activating my cosmic mana, I teleported immediately beside her. The moment I did, the relentless pull ceased, and Essie regained control, stabilizing herself. It was as if my mere presence served as a deterrent to whatever force had sought to ensnare her. What the hell was that? I inwardly cursed as I held on to Essie. Her eyes widened in shock and panic, her body trembling with fear. Gently, I placed a comforting claw on her back, soothing her as best I could. With a swift motion, I activated my teleportation ability, whisking us away from that perilous place and back to the safety of the planet. It's all right. I'm right here, just as I promised. You're safe? I tried to reassure her, but Essie remained in a state of panic, her eyes darting about nervously. I held her close, offering comfort as we slowly descended back to the safety of the ground. Once we touched down, Emmy was the first to discern that something was amiss. She hurried towards us, with Sidis and Brita close behind, followed by Enos, his expression etched with concern, and Lost, who appeared visibly anxious. What happened? Emmy asked. Just give her some space for now. Let her catch her breath, I said. As she was pulled, Lost spoke hesitantly, and all eyes turned to her. It's terrifying, getting dragged into that abyssal darkness without being able to do anything. My frown deepened as I continued to gently pat Essie. Chapter 438. Why? It took some time before we managed to coax Essie into a state of calmness. I watched her as she settled down, huddled next to Emmy, a frown gradually etching itself onto my face. Was it bad? Sidis, who was standing next to me, asked. One moment she was all right, but once she got past a certain point, it was as if something grabbed a hold of her and was dragging her, I answered. So it does have to do with the elements, Sidis replied, a tinge of confusion in his voice. I think so. We still need to see how it goes with Enos as well, just to be sure. Sidis turned to glance at our younger brother and shook his head. He's too busy flirting, he said with disapproval. My frown eased at that, and I shook my head. Heh, I don't think he knows what that means. It certainly seems to be working on her. Brita joined in on the conversation. Well then, how about we give them some more time? Are you ready? I asked. The The goddess shrugged nonchalantly. I am? Despite her assertion, I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety brewing within her, even as she attempted to conceal it. It's okay. Like I told Essie, I'll be there to teleport you away if anything happens. You better, she answered. To my right, Sidis rolled his eyes and clicked his tongue in annoyance before he strode over to Essie and Emmy. What's his deal? I asked. He's your brother, not mine, Brita answered. Casting one last glance in Enos's direction, I pivoted and proceeded towards little Essie. Emmy had draped her wing over her, and as I drew near, Essie lifted her head and locked eyes with me. How are you feeling? I asked gently. I am okay. I was just not used to being out of control, she replied, attempting to mask her unease. Yet, despite her words, I could discern the faint trembling of her claws. I sighed softly and tenderly patted her head. Get some rest and leave this to me. We'll figure it out, I reassured her gently. Let's go, I said as I looked at Brita. Just as we were on the brink of taking off, Enos abruptly lifted his head and spoke up. Where are you going? I thought we were next. You guys after Brita, all right? Enos looked at Lost, who wore a pitiful expression and nodded. All right, be safe, he said. With those words spoken, I flapped my wings and ascended into the skies, with Brita trailing closely behind. Throughout the journey, we kept a solemn silence, and I refrained from utilizing teleportation. I believed it best to allow Brita ample time to mentally brace herself before confronting the void. It wasn't until we left the planet's atmosphere that she finally spoke. You are going to catch me, right? Of course, I'm right here, don't worry, I reassured her, to which she nodded before she flew away. I watched her intently, my focus unwavering, poised to intervene at a moment's notice. Brita's form remained steadfast as she drew nearer to the void, and it was when she breached that threshold that the unexpected, or perhaps I should say, the expected occurred. I could see her struggle against the pull, noting that it wasn't as severe as what Essie had experienced. Unlike Essie, Brita appeared to retain control of her movements, exerting effort to resist and fly away. However, despite her resilience, the relentless tug of the void gradually drew her closer. Sensing the critical moment, I decided to take action. Once again, I teleported myself to Brita's side, and the faint tug swiftly dissipated upon my arrival. Though Brita's complexion was pallid, she remained in a far better state than Essie had been. I held onto her tightly and swiftly teleported us back to the safety of the planet before asking, "Are you all right?" Brita took a deep breath before nodding hesitantly. That was not quite what I expected, she admitted. What do you mean? I inquired, puzzled, as we slowly made our way toward the ground. I'm not sure, but the feeling of being dragged there it was terrible. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it filled me with terror as if I was doing something or going somewhere I shouldn't be, Brita explained as we descended. I lightly nodded, unsure of how to respond. Instead, I gently tapped her back with my tail, seeking to provide comfort to the now shaken goddess. By the time we landed on the ground, Brita's facade of indifference had returned. All eyes turned towards us, and I glanced at her, silently gauging if she wished to speak. However, as she remained silent, I took the initiative. She was pulled as well, though it wasn't as strong as when Essie was pulled, I explained to the group. So even divine energy will get pulled as well, Emmy mumbled deep in thought. Yes, the power behind it wasn't as bad, but it was still there and was slowly taking her, I confirmed. Sidis looked at Enos and asked, You sure you want to go? We pretty much have our answers already. No, I want to see it myself, he replied with a shake of his head. I let out a sigh and glanced at Lost, who seemed to have calmed down significantly but was still visibly anxious. Well, let's get that out of the way then. Enos nodded and gripped the ice dragoness tightly. Taking that as my cue, I promptly teleported all three of us beyond the planet's atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space. Lost's body shook heavily, but Enos curled his tail around hers, comforting her before he turned to glance at me. I gave him a nod in reply, and off he went. Since I was almost 100% certain of what was going to happen, I steadied my cosmic mana, awaiting their approach to the threshold. True to my expectations, as soon as they reached it, the pull returned with renewed strength. Just as I was about to move, Enos did something so stupid. Then again it was Enos, so I shouldn't have been surprised. Amidst them being dragged, he held on tightly to Lost and used all of his strength to hurl her back toward me, her speed akin to an asteroid streaking across space. What the foo? Chapter 439, Discovery. I watched as the ice dragoness streaked across space, hurling toward me with unimaginable speed. Her face was a blend of shock and disbelief. For a second, I found myself flabbergasted and nearly didn't react in time. Thankfully, I shook my head and teleported right next to her, then teleported us both back to my original position. Lost's eyes widened as she glanced around, attempting to discern her surroundings. When her gaze met mine, I offered her a small nod, which appeared to significantly calm her. However, her eyes widened once more as she turned to search for Enos. My attention swiftly returned to my foolish little brother. He remained a short distance from the void, gradually succumbing to its pull. His wings flapped frantically as he attempted to halt his involuntary movement. Let him stay a little longer. That should teach him not to do anything stupid. I did plan to save him as well, of course, but he still needed to learn his lesson. And so, I gathered my cosmic mana, ready to act at a moment's notice when suddenly something strange happened. What the? It was only for a few seconds, but I felt his mana surge, and the pull intensified almost tenfold. Just as I was about to jump, the pull seemed to release its hold on him and Enos momentarily stopped. The whiplash of emotions that I felt watching all of that unfold made me hesitate to act once more. It wasn't only until Lost nudged my side that I realized Enos was getting dragged again. It was slow this time, but it was there, and he didn't seem to have any tricks to stop it. That's when I jumped. With Lost at my side, I teleported us straight toward Enos. Once we emerged by his side, I was expecting to see him in distress, the same way the others were. I was wrong. The muscle brain had a savage grin on his face that seemed to be saying, "Did you see that?" Fighting back the urge to sigh, I instantly teleported us back to the safety of the planet. Once we reappeared on the mountain, it was as if a switch had flipped and Enos suddenly started to laugh. "Ha ha ha, did you see that? This idiot," I mumbled before using my tail to smack his head hard. Though I thought it was hard, it merely caused him to lower his head and look at me with a puzzled expression. What was that for? Ah, the sigh that I had been holding back escaped my mouth as I shook my head. "What did you do?" I asked as the others flocked around us. Even Lost seemed to be in a much better state than I would have assumed. "What did I do?" he asked, puzzled. Yes, the pull suddenly increased, and just when I was about to drag you back, it momentarily stopped. "What was that?" I asked once again. "The pull stopped?" Sidis mumbled by my side. "Yes." Essie seemed a lot better than when I left her, and Brita was calmly waiting for him to explain. Emmy looked at Lost, then me before her eyes finally settled on Enos. Faced with everyone's gazes, Enos awkwardly scratched the back of his head. "I didn't do much really. I just fought back," he said. "Fought back?" Brita asked with a frown. "We all fought back, but that didn't do much." Enos went silent for a few seconds. It looked like he was trying to find the right words before he spoke, which was rare. I didn't mean physically fight back. I meant with mana," he said. Brita frowned, and I turned to look at Sidis and Emmy, who both shrugged. Little Essie appeared to be in deep thought as she heard what he said. "With mana?" Lost mumbled by his side. "Yes, the pull, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't feel like it drags us. It drags the mana," he said, trying to explain. My eyes widened in understanding. We already established that the reason me, Sidis, and Emmy weren't pulled was because of our elements. Then it made sense that the void pulled at the mana itself, not just us. "So, you mean to tell me, you fought for control over your mana against the void, and you momentarily succeeded?" Emmy asked slowly. Enos's grin was almost infectious as he nodded. "I guess I did." "What a monster," I inwardly muttered. "None of them are normal. I always knew that. The entire time it was dragging me. The mana inside my soul space was in chaos," Enos said. He paused for a few seconds, trying to recall the feeling before he continued. "It's hard to notice right away. The feeling of being dragged through your soul space it's bad." "Wait, That doesn't make much sense. I don't have a soul space. Brita jumped in and spoke with a frown. Enos shrugged before answering, I don't know. I'm only sharing what happened to me. What do you think? Sidis approached me and asked. I looked over at Enos, who was now excitedly explaining the feeling of fighting against the void to Essie, Lost, and Brita before I replied. It makes sense, I suppose. What is confusing is why our elements aren't affected. I wonder what's out there. In the void, I mean, Emmy suddenly said. Best not entertain that idea. Remember, no one ever got back. Yes, but they were all influenced by the pull. We are not, she explained. Too risky. I shook my head. There's no need to drag anyone with you if you have a death wish, Sidis coldly harumphed. Emmy rolled her eyes. You can just admit that you are afraid? Afraid? Me? Heh, Sidis scoffed. All right, knock it off you too. I want to go again. Enos's sudden voice caused me to raise my brows and ask, Go again, as in? I want to go against the void. Yeah, absolutely not, I replied. Huh? But why? He asked. It's too risky, you muscle brain. We don't know what's out there. Or worse, who is out there.
But
No buts, we will leave for Anes. The void isn't going anywhere. Enos looked like he wanted to argue some more, but eventually stopped himself from doing so. Lost, who was by his side, placed a comforting claw on his back. Chapter 440. Anes. You ready? I asked the ice dragoness as we left the cave she called home behind. I could see the reluctance in her gaze as she looked back at it. Although she had been trapped here for a while, this place had been one she called home as well, and I was sure it wasn't easy to let that go. Yes, I am, she answered hesitantly. Are you sure you don't want to take anything back with you? Emmy asked, referring to the various sculptures left inside. Lost nodded with a smile and replied, It's okay. They can serve as proof, she said. Enos, puzzled, tilted his head and asked, Proof? Lost nodded and continued, Yes, proof that Lost was here. That I was here. Oh, his response was lackluster, but she didn't seem to mind. But they are so pretty. Essie argued. Lost chuckled at that and said, It's okay. I can always make more. That's the spirit. I nodded before turning toward the others. All right then, everyone stays close. Let's go. With that, our group, now bigger by one, took off and made our way out of the planet. Our forms left behind a faint trail of mana as we went. I turned my gaze downwards one last time, glancing at the large mountain. I wonder if I'll ever come back here. Are you sure about this, brother? Sidis's solemn voice resounded in my mind. I'm sure we'll get there, eventually, I answered, lacking any conviction. I doubt we are going the right way. Isn't that the ruined planet we just passed by before? He said. I am sure she knows where we're going, I replied, slowly losing whatever confidence I had left. Brita, who was flying to my left, had a strange expression on her face as she glanced at the ruined planet we just passed. Even Essie and Emmy seemed to notice the problem. The only one that didn't look like he cared was Enos. He was flying alongside, Lost in the lead with a bored look on his face. The cosmic mana is not talking to you? Emmy suddenly asked as she joined in, pushing Sidis out of the way. He glared at her but didn't do anything. No, that's why we are just following her, I said. Someone is coming, Brita suddenly said. All of us felt the presence she was talking about and turned to face the newcomer. Lost, who was taking the lead, slowed down as well, while little Essie quickly jumped on top of my head. A god. The figure approaching us was colossal. He appeared human, yet his immense size and the overwhelming divinity emanating from his being indicated his identity as a deity. He towered over me, surpassing even my considerable size. I was the largest among us, yet he dwarfed me in comparison. I wondered if he might be as large as my grandfather. Everyone tensed up, poised to react should he prove hostile. His face was concealed by a peculiar white mask, making it challenging to discern his features. There were no visible weapons on him, and he wore only a loose white robe. It was then that Lost's aura suddenly flared. She pivoted towards the deity and streaked forward like a meteor. Before anyone could react, she reached him. I hesitated for a moment, about to teleport, but held back. Sensing no imminent danger from him, I trusted my instincts and observed. Indeed, the deity appeared surprised by Lost's sudden approach. He lowered his colossal head to study her as she halted beside him. With a gentle gesture, he moved his finger and patted her head. The ice dragoness appeared jubilant, a wide grin spreading across her face. The two conversed for a while before she gestured towards us. The deity nodded in response, waving us over. "You know him?" I asked Brita. She rolled her eyes and replied, "Why would I know him? Just because I'm a goddess doesn't mean I know all of the other deities." "Whoa, okay. I was just asking," I answered. "Do I go for his head?" Enos asked. "What? No. He looks like lost friend. Be nice, let's go." It didn't take long before we were standing in front of the massive god. His large frame would have been intimidating once upon a time. Now, however, it only looked like a bigger target. "This is Zephyrion. He is my friend," she says, introducing us to the masked deity. He lowered his head and gave us a bow. "A pleasure to meet you. I'm Zephyrion, god of whispers and hidden truths." We all returned the bow, and I took the lead to speak. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm Ether the Voidwalker. These are my siblings, Sidis, Emmy, Essie, and my friend Brita." Zephyrion nodded and replied, "I have heard of you. The Voidwalker, the Silent Shadow, the Wall, and the Golden Spear." Hearing that, Sidis turned to look back at Emmy with a smug expression on his face. She clicked her tongue and pretended not to see him. "You have?" I answered, surprised. Did news of us travel all the way to the other side of the universe? I wondered. "Your reputation precedes you," he said, pausing to look at Lost before continuing, "though it's a blessing to see little Lost, safe and sound. Please follow me. I hear you were planning to visit Aines." "Yes, thank you." With that, the veiled deity turned and flew the opposite way from where we were going. Sidis looked at me with a gaze that screamed, "I told you so," but I tactfully chose to ignore it. The journey was spent in silence. Lost was flying next to Zephyrion, and Enos seemed to be in a bad mood because of that. Thankfully, it seemed like we weren't that far off Aines. "Whoa, is that it?" Essie's voice sounded in my mind. "I guess it is," I answered. "It's different," she added, and I couldn't help but agree. Aines wasn't a planet. No, it was a vast, flat piece of land. Its size was enormous, but it was flat, akin to a board. In the middle of it was a tall pillar that pierced the sky and was faintly glowing with a multicolored light. "Welcome to Aines," Zephyrion said as he led us to the strange plane. Lost appeared exhilarated to return home, her aura pulsating as ice mana swirled around her, causing her scales to take on a frosty hue. As we drew nearer, we gradually passed through an imperceptible barrier, and my eyes widened in surprise at the abundance of mana in this place. Though my connection to it was not as strong as before, I couldn't help but feel astonished. "What kind of place is this?" I wondered as I studied the tall pillar in the distance.